So we are going to be talking about pedestrian crossing today. Pedestrian crossing. Now, pedestrian crossing is the terminology officially used in the Vienna Conventions on road safety and road signs. So pedestrian crossing is a much more common thing in British English. We just usually say crosswalks in American English. They also say things like zebra crossing. This is more common in Britain. So, you don't always say it, but sometimes people are like, yeah, it looks like a zebra. But yeah, some of the crossings are zebra, but that's usually when it's diagonal. Okay, so anyway, if we go into the history of the crosswalk. So crosswalks have been around for thousands of years. In ancient Pompeii, they had crosswalks that were stepping stones to go over the streets, mainly because the streets in Pompeii functioned as part sewer system, so people didn't want to necessarily step in the sewer system. So crosswalks have been around for a while. Now, in Britain, in around the 1860s, in London, they actually set up, a railroad engineer decided, looking at kind of a way to make money, he used a similar thing they use for railway crossings to set up something for people crossing, where it was like some kind of turn-operated gas lamp that turned red or green based on the turn. Especially at night, it was more for the red and green. And a police constable would stand there, he'd turn it, and that's how it would work. It lasted for about a year, and then the gas leaked and it caused an explosion, which injured said police constable. So it was about 50 years until they decided to do more stuff, but there were people who were already concerned about how many people were getting hit by cars. So they're like, maybe we should do something about it. And eventually, in the early 1900s, it started to become more standard, especially in Britain and America, to have more crosswalking safety. And also another big part about crosswalks is it helps with the traffic calming effect. It helps to make sure that traffic isn't all over the place and isn't going super fast. It helps to slow things down and make it safe to cross. Now technically, any intersection in America, except for I think in Maine and Michigan, if it's an intersection, it's technically an unmarked crosswalk. So you're not jaywalking if you walk on any intersection, you have the right of way. But, it's still jaywalking if you cross in other places. So, one of the things they do for design is, so usually, again, it's at intersections. Sometimes it's not. Also, other times, they, instead of doing necessarily a pattern across the road, they'll set it up so that it could be a tunnel under or a bridge above. It's not necessarily monetarily worth it. Plus, people are less likely to take a bridge if they see that there's stairs, and are more likely to just jaywalk. So they spend both the money, and then they just get the people that jaywalk because they're too lazy to actually take the stairs to go up and over the bridge. So that's what they've found with that. But also sometimes what you'll see is what's called a pedestrian scramble. So that's when instead they have all lights turn red, so you can cross in any one direction. So you can cross one way, the other way, or diagonal. That's called a pedestrian scramble. Now, let's see. Another thing to talk about is crosswalk shortening. So you can see you got crosswalk, sometimes it sticks out, you got the jut out in the pavement, so you got closer. And of course, if it's a long street, you have traffic islands and the little traffic refuges for pedestrians, so that it makes the walk slightly not as long as it could be, and you can stop in the middle and see, make sure you're not getting hit by a car. Now, another thing you have to think about is, because crosswalk striping is another thing, because the road has stripes that are, as you can see, you can bring a large vehicle down to do the striping for the main roads. But now, to do it for a crosswalk, as you can see, about a white bar is usually 12 inches to 24 inches apart, and that usually requires a handheld device that usually heats up a powder, and then it lays down the thermoplastic paint onto the street. And that's usually hand driven, and it's a specialized usage. So that's kind of interesting about crosswalks, that you need your own it needs a required special vehicle and laws that govern the equipment that lays down these lines varies in different countries and in different states. Now, again, there's a lot of markings for crosswalks in America. Again, we have the solid convention, so it's all solid here. Just a standard, so we're going to see that it'll be two like white lines crossing here. What you see very often, the most common, is the continental, so that's the classic crosswalk. There's also a dashed, the zebra crosswalk. This is also pretty common in Britain. And the ladder crosswalk. Sometimes I see some of these. Now in Britain it's a little different. They actually have four main names. Well, okay, so let's go to the signalized intersections in America. Because usually what you have is something that says it used to say walk, don't walk, but it's officially been changed per some regulations now. It's been updated to mainly be red hand and white walking person. This is the newer regulation under a lot of walkways. So you don't usually see the don't walk sign as often anymore. And one thing they've also found that's kind of interesting is, well, I guess I'll get to that in a little bit. So for the United Kingdom, they have four main descriptions of their crossing. They have pelican crossing, which is where you see the signal is on the other side of the road, so you see it and you go watching. They have puffin crossing, which is where the signal is right there, so you can actually see the time right there. You can also see the time for the other people, so you can know how much longer do I have until I can walk. Now for there's also a signal name for the bikes, which is called toucan crossing for bikes. And it's called Pegasus crossing for equestrians. That's how the system works in Britain. Now in Australia, I don't know. It's pretty similar to America. They usually have like flashing lights just to know when to like slow down motorists and stuff. Another thing people probably think about is pedestrian call buttons. Like, do they actually work? Like usually, most of the time, there is no signalized input that anything's happened. But they do find, if some output goes and says, yes, something has happened, then usually people are more likely to stay. But now a lot of the buttons could be placebo buttons or buttons that used to work, but they don't work. But the point of that is they still give the illusion of control to the person, which still makes them say, oh, I'm pressing this button, and soon I'm going to be able to cross the crosswalk. Another reason a lot of buttons don't work is because it didn't always used to be traffic timed. Sometimes it used to be when they updated it to like go in cycles, then they just basically stopped with having people go through using the crosswalk. After they updated times, and they're just outdated, they're actually not in use anymore, so you're just pressing a button to do nothing. But that's how it is. I mean, in Europe, a lot of places in Europe don't even have a lot of stuff. They usually just have signs, and it's almost more like a recommendation. Like in France, you're not required to have crosswalks, but if there is one, and you're within 50 meters of it, you have to use it. It's against the law to not use that crosswalk and jaywalk. But that's how it is in Europe. There's a lot of, that's just how it just works in the European places. So for countdown timers, what people have actually found is they're kind of like, you'd think they'd be nice, but they're actually not the greatest because it gives people more of an incentive to go when they see it's like, oh, I got 1 second left, let's run. It actually tends to work better when you just see a flashing light and there is no countdown timer. That's the best actually for most people. That causes the least amount of accidents. Another thing I want to say was I forgot about this earlier, crosswalks as art, because sometimes they don't follow these standard things, and there's been examples where they try to make it 3D, they try to have like little fish going around as their art. There's whole entire crosswalk art competitions, so crosswalks don't just have to be these kind of things, they can be art too. And there's also even variations in the people. So for example, in Mexico, one of the things they do with the countdown timer is actually the little man starts walking faster as you get closer to the time. In Germany, they have a guy with a hat and a girl with a hat, and they have like a special name for the people with a hat, but it's in German, I can't really pronounce it. You know it? Yeah, so that's how that works. But and also there's even a place where they have a little like dancing guy, and they found that the dancing person increases people waiting by 83% to wait for what? Wait for the wait for the crosswalk. So
Got another one.
let's see. Oh, here we go. So another thing.
Well, then just pause a second. We need to continue with the phone because they're covering this one.
Okay, carry on, Paul.
Okay, so I was talking about the dancing guy that increases, so that they've actually found that that signal helps to increase the pedestrian stay by like about 83%. And other places too, I was thinking about for some of, well, I guess wait a second. So we also should talk about people that have disabilities. So sometimes you might see there's tactile indicators, so that like some people that are blind, they can feel where a crosswalk's about to start. These tactile indicators, they try to make sure that the buttons, some of them are like electrostatic, so you don't have to press too hard to turn on the buttons. Of course, as you might know, since you're in Pittsburgh, there's the audible signals, which most often say, what they say in the Pittsburgh, it's like, now crossing Bigelow, or somewhere like that. That is like the most common audible signal. Though in other places, in like Japan, they'll actually play a little folk music. So, and they always try to keep like a steady beep going, just so you know. The idea was they weren't very popular in the past because everyone was worried about noise pollution. I mean, I don't know why it'd be that bad, but nowadays they've decided you should not be able to hear it like 6 feet out, or it might be 6 meters, which is significantly different. But that's just how far it should be out. You should be able to hear it within that range and not hear it that high out of that range. Now, another thing they use is relief symbols for some people that are, I guess, somewhat blind, but not completely blind. You can actually look, they actually work out little maps of what the whole entire crosswalk's gonna look like. So you can basically plan ahead on how you're gonna go through your crosswalk by looking at a relief symbol that shows where the cars are, where you start, where everything is on the crosswalk. And another thing that was interesting, but it's not really in use, is a key-based system where they give people with disabilities keys that actually interact, so you can actually lengthen the time for the light to be on, and then you can get like more time to cross. But that system hasn't necessarily worked out yet, but I think it's pretty interesting. Now, one of the things they tried to work with you also have to think about lights too on your crosswalks. So one of the big things they were trying is lights on the bollard, on bullocks, because these lights are very good in the fact that they don't illuminate the background, but they do illuminate the pedestrian, which causes good contrast for people driving at night. And sometimes there's also the warning lights that are just on the road or flashing. They can show you. There's also something called a hawk sensor, I believe, that it's basically like a light above, and once you walk across, the light starts flashing to show that there's a pedestrian there. And then there's also the railway pedestrian crossing, which they've even had to work out in like rural places to work with animals. So sometimes there's just like a gate, so you gotta open the gate and walk through so that the animals don't come through. And the interesting thing with crosswalks and safety is, believe it or not, crosswalks tend to have higher accident rates when they're not coupled with other things than no crosswalks at all. In fact, you're more likely to be hit on a crosswalk than just jaywalking. Now, I feel like that could be a statistical problem. It's like, well, more people are going to take crosswalks, so more people are going to get hit on crosswalks. But hopefully, they work with the fact that they took percentages. But when you combine it with other safety features, crosswalks do tend to increase safety, especially if you put like speed bumps or speed checks. That usually slows people down. And then that's basically how crosswalks work. And they are very important because, again, without them, as one guy was complaining, there's a bunch of people getting hit by cars in the early 1900s because they don't have any crosswalks. So people just walk out and they get hit by a car. You used to have to, like, automobile laws were not that great. You used to have to take a right turn onto a highway. Like, that's not safe. Or a left turn, I think, onto a highway sometimes. But, we've come somewhat of a way. They're still working things out, but We've come a long way. Okay. This is
Yes,
beautiful.
boss.
I learned a lot. What, Pelican crossings?
Pelican crossing.
It stands for something.